What's your love language? When I initially decided on a title for this week to include in the newsletter, 6 weeks before I knew I was going to preach, that's a super fun part of being a minister, is that crystal ball moment of, or that crazy 8-ball. What shall I preach on? 6 weeks. So I kept it as vague as possible. And I was really only thinking about how we express love through acts of service. Then our administrator, Elaine, asked if I was going to want an image for the order of service that reflects the 5 love languages. 5 love languages. I wonder what they are. So I asked my friend Google, and I saw that the 5 love languages are the ones that Jeffrey and I talked about. Words of affirmation, quality time, physical touch, receiving gifts, and acts of service. Great! I wasn't sure how I'd have time to include all of them in depth, but I figured I could at least touch on them. And then I scrolled down the page. No, there are 7 love languages. More scrolling. No, there are 10. I stopped scrolling. Humans are endlessly creative, and I do not doubt that the actual number is potentially infinite. But before we get into the love part, I think it's important to talk about language. You see, love language can be as difficult for us to interpret as spoken language, where even an unfamiliar accent can throw us off. When we encounter someone with an unfamiliar accent, we have to listen extra hard. We might even find it helpful to watch their lips or their gestures to help us understand. Active listening is an acquired skill, and sometimes we have to do a little bit of contextual guesswork to get the message. We do contextual guesswork all the time. You're reading a book, and you come across an unfamiliar word, and you note the context, and you can be pretty certain that you have at least the gist of the word. So how does this work in love language? Suppose your love language is candy and flowers, and your beloved's love language is clearing a clogged drain. The action might not be what you were hoping for on Valentine's, but if you pay attention to the intent, you'll hear the love in the unfamiliar accent. And speaking of language, sometimes we forget that our language, love language or spoken, is culturally defined and understood. Language changes over time, which may be why love language keeps expanding to keep up with the endless creativity that I spoke of earlier. So let me give you a really cute example. When I was teaching communications in the early 2000s, I overheard one of my students saying to another that I was fat. Now, anyone who's even a tiny bit sensitive about their body image will know that it took an enormous amount of self-control not to bring down the wrath of God. So I interrupted their conversation to ask just what they meant. And the student beamed, and I scowled. Student: you know, Mrs. B, fat. Me: is that supposed to be a compliment? Student, mentally calculating my age despite my coolness. Oh, not fat, I mean fat. Me, trying hard to regain my coolness. Can you tell me how you spell that? Student, again calculating my age, with my coolness taking yet another dip. P-H-A-T, fat, you know, excellent. I thanked the student for the kind thought and suggested that they just go with old-fashioned words with dinosaurs like me. Language changes over time, and love languages are no exception. So one more thought about the correlation between spoken language and love language. And then we'll head into the indeterminate number of love languages that we might employ, not only with our beloveds, but with those with whom we serve the greater good. That's all y'all. it is very helpful to be multilingual, conversant, if not fluent. When we learn a new spoken language, it can be useful to learn from native speakers, to practice with a beginner's mind and realize that there is no such thing as perfection, to make it fun, and to find ways to use the language in everyday conversation. Because you might be able to conjugate verbs all day, but still not speak Spanish. So alrighty, let's get to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter of love language. Thank you. It's rough crowd today. I mean love languages and acts of compassion and service. So let me begin by saying that I will inevitably leave out someone or something in this very limited exploration. So I will apologize in advance. I also recognize that some of you already have a really strong love language in acts of service. If that is your primary language and way of relating to a world that desperately needs more love, please do not hear this list as an accusation or a demand that you should do more. We can't do it all. In our time with the children today, although Jeffrey the porcupine really wanted cuddles, he had some limitations in that regard, and he found other ways to give and receive love and care. So, a very tangible example. Our kitchen crew is on deck every Sunday to prepare drinks and snacks for all you ravenous wolves who have completed the marathon that we call worship. Their love language is very tangible and so appreciated. And where do you think all those snacks come from? Not the snack fairy. They arrive from folks whose love language is to bring food, sometimes homemade, sometimes store-bought, always appreciated. If social justice is your passion, then getting involved with the justice advocacy team here at UU Amherst and writing postcards, calling regional representatives, attending events and demonstrations, that could be your love language. Do you have some ideas percolating? I have barely scratched the surface of the ways to be involved, and yet there is one common denominator, and that is saying yes. Can you give someone a ride? Yes. Can you be courageous and loving enough to ask for a ride? Yes. It takes courage, the root of which is heart. The original definition was to speak one's mind by telling one's heart. I'm going to say that nobody is born with that ability. It takes practice, just like learning a new language. To speak one's mind by telling one's heart. My paternal grandmother was famous for often giving people a piece of her mind. It was pretty much always angry and very likely hurtful. Maybe she wasn't brave enough to speak up. Maybe she was brave enough to speak up, but she wasn't courageous enough to say why. Courage is a learned trait. Nobody is born with it. Her family of origin did not have the tools or skills to pass on to her. So when she would tell someone how angry she wasn't able to say that she was angry because she was scared or because she was protecting her loved ones. She didn't have the tools to tell her heart, only to speak her mind. One of the beautiful attributes of Unitarian Universalism is that it accepts us as we are, and it gives us the tools to become better. It's wonderful and healing and affirming to be the recipient of our dedication to the inherent worth and dignity of each individual. But it takes work, spiritual work, to see that worth and dignity in another and to do something about it. So I like to say, come as you are, but don't stay that way. Grow, Speak your mind by telling your heart. This faith will give you the space, the tools, and the grace to know not only your mind, but your heart as well. What is your love language? So far, I have focused on gifts of service, but that is just one love language. There are at least 4 others. Does it make your heart happy to offer words of affirmation, to recognize the good in another and to let them know you see it? Then do that. Do you show love by clearing your calendar and creating the conditions to spend quality time with the people you care about? Do more of that. Giving and receiving gifts is probably one of the most visible and least understood of the love languages. We're pretty good at tangible things. But what about the gift of our attention? The gift of a phone call? The gift of letting someone merge into traffic, especially if it's a white Kia Sorento with my license plate? But truly, a small, thoughtful gift of self is priceless. You probably know that infant primates, including humans, will die without physical touch. I don't think we ever outgrow that. I think that in our relationships, it is not hate that will kill our spirits. It's indifference. Love and indifference cannot coexist. Whatever your love language, I have just one overall request. Don't hold back. Be courageous. Speak your mind by telling all your heart. A thing you might do would be to shower the people you love with love.